Main intention of this module is to familiarize the student with the post-independent development strategies. Independent development strategies adopted by India that have shaped the present structure of Indian economy. To understand this, it is important to know the state of Indian economy prior to independence. India had an independent, self-reliant, and prosperous economy before the advent of British rule. The economy of 18th century was primarily an agricultural economy. Just before the 18th century, Indian economy was agricultural economy, and it was fabulous. It was able to fill the requirement of the people of that period. Apart from it, India was also known for its developed handicraft industry throughout the world. Industry throughout the world. Due to developed handicraft industry, India was getting name and fame throughout the world. The prominent handicraft industry which gave prime place to India in the world market were cotton and silk textile, metal industries, precious stone, gold and silver jewelry, tannery, perfumery, etc. The Indian handicraft enjoyed a worldwide reputation of the fine quality and high standard of craftsmanship. The goods which were producing, the goods which were being produced at that period in India related to handicraft industry was famous throughout the world because of high quality. However, Indian economy was flourished till 18th century, started to decline with the advent of British rule. Advent of British rule. British government pursued economic policies for the protection and promotion of economic interest of Britain rather than the development of Indian economy. It changed the whole structure of Indian economy and transferred it into a supplier of raw material supplier of raw material and consumer of finished goods. Finished goods produced of Britain industry. During the entire period British rule, no meaningful economic progress took place, such as at the time of independence, India had a poor and stagnant economy. At the time of independence, India had poor and stagnant economy. The best indicator of economic condition of nation is its national income and per capita income. But no systematic and sincere attempts were made by the British government to estimate India's national income. However, individual attempts made by some expert in this regard. Notable among estimators were William Big Boy, Findlay, Dadabhai Naroji, Wadia and Joshi, K.T. Shah, V.K. R.V. Rao, and R.C. Desai. All these estimates produced conflicting and inconsistent results. However, the estimate given by Dr. Rao was considered a very significant. Different estimate shows that the level of national income and per capita income was very low during the colonial period. During the colonial period, the growth of aggregate real output was less than 2% during the colonial period, and the growth of per capita output was just half, but its distribution was also inadequate. It means barring a few, most of the people were living in object poverty. Most of the people were living at that period at the bottom level, means in another way we can say they were living at the abject poverty. Now let us understand about the agricultural sector agricultural sector during the colonial period. The Indian economy during the colonial rule was primarily an agricultural economy. Agricultural economy, nearly 85% of the country's population lived in villages during this period and derived its livelihood directly or indirectly from the agricultural sector of the Indian economy. Despite being major sources of livelihood, the agricultural sector continued to experience stagnation and deterioration during the colonial period. Backwardness during the colonial period. The main causes of stagnation of agricultural sector were as follows. First, land revenue system. The most prominent cause was new economic land tenure system that was introduced by the British rulers in India. This led this led heavy loss at that period for the Indian farmers. This system, the land tenure system had three forms: Jamidari system, Mahalwadi system, and Raiyatwadi system. This system gave birth to classes: landlords, landlords and landless landless farmers. Landless farmers. This system gave birth to classes. Landless means jamidars and landlords means jamidars and landless cultivators. Especially under jamidari system, jamidars used to exploit cultivators. They used to change heavy rate of land revenue from the cultivators, because of which the small farmers neither had sufficient resources nor the incentives to invest in agriculture. Due to lack of investment in agricultural sector, Indian agricultural sector could not develop at that period. They could never leave agricultural sector despite their exploitation because of lack of vocational avenues avenues outside the agriculture. Since outside the agriculture any future was not present, because of this Indian farmers had to die having been the part of the agriculture. Besides this, jamidars forced cultivators to work in their own farms. They themselves led lavish life, no doubt, and hardly spent their income on investment in agriculture. Due to lack of investment in agricultural sector could not develop at all. Thus, agriculture remained backward. Thus, agriculture sector remained backward. Now, the second point is high degree of vulnerability. British rulers did not give much attention to the improved irrigation facilities, drainage facilities, soil productive and technological upgradation in India. They did not provide any attention towards all these matters. Agricultural production was depend on monsoon, hence the production and productivity in country's agricultural sector were reduced to the lowest level, and farmers were forced to live in misery. They were forced to live in misery. Third is commercialization of agriculture. British rulers initiated commercialization of agriculture, in which they encouraged production of cash crops in place of food crops. As a result, there was somewhat higher yield of cash crop in certain areas of the country. But this did not improve the economic condition of farmers, because cash crop were used mainly by the British industries, which were set up in the Great Britain, directly or indirectly. Thus, Britishers transferred Indian agriculture into a raw material exporting activity. As a result of reduction in production of food crops and lack of proper policies, the country had to suffer frequent occurrence of famines. Frequent occurrence of famines. Besides these topics, we have to understand about also two points: subsistence farming and commercialization of agriculture. Subsistence farming refers to farming in which the crops are produced to meet the basic needs of the family. Basic needs of the family. Family with surplus, with little surplus for the market, whereas commercial agriculture implies production of agricultural crops for the market rather than for self consumption. In subsistence farming, farming is done for self consumption, whereas in commercial agriculture, production is not done for the self consumption. It is always done for filling the for filling the requirement of the market. Now the last point of this agricultural sector is partition of the country. Partition of the country. Partition of the partition of the country. Partition of the country had also adversely affected India's agricultural production. It did not create problem of shortage of raw material and food crisis in the country, but also resulted in loss of market for finished products. The products which were being produced by the industries of this sector, for these market was lost due to the partition of the Hindustan, as well as important productive food grain area fell in this western part of the Pakistan, due to which India had to suffer a lot when it got independence. Now let us study about the impact of partition on the Indian economy. Impact of partition on the Indian economy. The movement we are going to study about the impact of the partition, we should understand about the geographical structure of that period. At this period, this whole part was known as Hindustan. And this was divided by the cunning policies of the Britishers into three parts. This part became Western Pakistan, and this became India. And this became Eastern Pakistan, which is now known as Bangladesh, and this part is known as Pakistan. Now we are going to study, since we are going to study about the impact of partition of Indian economy, so we should understand this in 3 points. First, shortage of raw material. Partition created serious problem of shortage of raw material for jute mills of Kolkata, and textile mill of Mumbai and Ahmedabad. As a result of partition, the whole fertile land under the jute production area fell in the East Pakistan. Besides this, The problem of raw material was faced by the paper mill, leather industries, and some other chemical industries which were set up in different part of the India. Second, food problem, West Punjab and Sindh. This is West Punjab and this is Sindh. West Punjab and Sindh were known for food granaries of India. As a result of partition, these areas went to Pakistan. Consequently, India had to face problem of food crisis. Problem of food crisis. Loss of market. Partition had reduced the size of market, which was a severe blow to the Indian industries. Loss of market. The things which were being produced in India, they all were being sold in this part very conveniently. But due to partition, the area where products were being sold, the area where products were being sold now could not be sold. So, partition provided a severe blow to Indian industries. Industrial sector. As a result of British policies, India lagged behind in growth of industrial sector. Britishers systematically destroyed Indian handicraft industry. This handicraft industry, because of which this India was famous throughout the world, that was systematically destroyed by the Britishers, and no modern industrial base was allowed to come up. At that period. Thus British rule or British government deindustrialized the Indian economy. The primary motive behind deindustrialization by the colonial government was in twofold. First, to get raw material, to get raw material from India at cheap rate for the industries of the Great Britain. Thus, Britishers tried their best to reduce India to a mere exporter of raw material to British industries. Second, to sell British manufactured goods in Indian market. At higher price. Indian handicraft industry in 18th century was well developed. Particularly, the Indian textile industry was well known throughout the world. The muslin of Decca and calico, because of their quality, were in great demand in all countries of the world. Along with this, many industries were getting name and fame because of their high quality of product throughout the world. This all were going on before the advent of the Britishers. Due to advent of Britishers, whatever benefits which were being received by the Indians from the industrial sector, by the Indians from their industrial sector, they all started to be degraded. They all started to disappear from the fortunes of the Indians. The big loss of Indians, or in another way, the big loss to India during the British rule was the decline of its world famous traditional handicraft industry. Britishers took the various steps for degrading the traditional handicraft industry related to Hindustan, due to which Hindustan was able to provide a stiff competition to machine-made products of Great Britain. For this, tariff-free export of raw material from India to Britain and tariff-free import of British industrial product into India, along with heavy duty on export of Indian handicrafts, implied a loss of domestic as well as foreign market of the Indian handicraft products. Second, low cost and good quality of machine-made products. Once again, low cost and good quality of machine-made products from Britain gave a stiff competition to Indian handicraft industries, which were not being patronized by the Britishers at all. Prior to the British rule, the Nawab and Rajas used to patronize handicraft industries. The advent of British rule meant the disappearance of princely court and consequently an end to the state of patronage enjoyed by the handicraft industry in 18th century. As a result, there was a decline of demand of Indian handicraft industry, not only in India but throughout of the world. Also. Development mean of transport accelerated the process of decline of handicraft industry. Railways were introduced in India, which facilitated transportation of British products across different part of the country, due to which traditional handicraft industry lost its market in India itself. As a result, Indian handicraft lost their share of domestic market. Now we have to study about the adverse impact of deindustrialization of India. Decline of handicraft industry provided lot of adverse impact on Indian economy at that period. First, it created large scale of unemployment. Large scale of unemployment. The most adverse impact was on the cotton textile industry of India, which was evidently present in this western part of the India and eastern part of this India. A large number of weavers became unemployed. These unemployed weavers or craftsmen migrated from urban area to rural area. Urban area to rural area, this increased the burden of population on agricultural village. The agriculture sector, which was dying due to burden of excess population, that had to bear migration of unemployed weavers, as well as consumer demand in Indian market could not be met by the supply of locally made goods, with which encouraged the import of machine made products in India from Britain, because they filled the gap which emerged in India due to lack of traditional handicraft industry. Traditional handicraft industry. During the second half of the 19th century, modern industries developing through started very slowly. It was mainly the private sector initiatives. The establishment of industries in this period was mainly confined to the cotton textile and jute mills of this area. The cotton textile mills were mainly dominated by the Indians, and they were located to western part of the India, especially in Maharashtra and Gujarat. On the other hand, jute mill in Bengal were established mainly by the British capitalist. No attention was paid by the British rulers to the promotion of capital good industries in India. Capital good industries or heavy industries mainly comprises of machine tools which are used for further production. These industries require huge investment which was beyond the means of Indian investors. The state partition in the process of industrialization was very limited and confined to the area, which enhanced the size of market from British products in India. Industrial sector during the British rule exploited by the Britishers, due to which it emerged on the eve of independence as backward and low-side growth. The two main drawbacks of industrial sector during the colonial rule were: first, growth rate of industrial sector and contribution of GDP was very small. Growth rate of industrial sector and contribution of industrial sector to GDP was very small. It was not high. There was limited area of operation of public sector in the country, because at that period Britishers were not doing industrial work directly for development of the Indian people. Public sector in those days was confined only to railway, power generation, communication, port, and few developmental undertakings. Because of this, public sector could not provide attention towards development of industrial sector in India, since their main motive was exploitation of Indian wealth at any level, at any cost, for protection and promotion of British industry, so they did not provide attention towards development of India or Indian industrial sector. Now we are going to study about the foreign trade. Indian occupied prime place in foreign trade before the advent of the Britishers. Before the advent of the Britishers, India was enjoying surplus. India was enjoying huge benefit from the foreign trade, due to which India was getting progress at the vibrant level in 18th century. But due to advent of the Britishers, the vibrantness which was present in foreign trade in 18th century, that became stagnant and came in favor of the Britishers, due to which Indians had to face huge loss. Huge loss. India used to export its good to far-flung country in the world, and in return, since India used to get gold, silver and precious stones, but later on, production trade and stiff policies of the British government, Indians could not develop in this sector also. Consequently, the foreign trade, which was developing Indians at every level, started to develop British Empire at every positive level. Production, trade and tariff policies of the colonial government adversely affected the composition, direction and volume of the foreign trade in India. Composition of foreign trade. During the British rule, British traders were given government protection and help, while Indian traders had to bear various type of restrictions. Indian traders were being imposed, were being exploited by the Britishers. Britain imposed heavy import duties on Indian goods, particularly its cotton textile. In the game plan of colonial trade policy, India was reduced to exporter of primary product and importer of British machine-made products. India's main export item was primarily product of primary products like raw material, like raw silk, raw cotton, raw wood, sugar, indigo, jute. On the other hand, the major import were finished consumer goods like cotton, silk, woolen cloths from Britain itself, and capital goods like machinery and railway sleepers from Britain itself, due to which Indians had to pay in due to which Indians had to pay in gold. Indians had to pay at higher rate. Direction of foreign trade. During its rule, Britain maintained almost a monopoly control over India's foreign trade. Monopoly control means all traditional area of India was being controlled by the Britishers alone. They monopolized the Indian trade. More than 50%, more than 50% of India's foreign trade was restricted only to Great Britain, and rest was shared by the few countries like China, Ceylon, and Prussia, etc. The opening of Suez Canal further intensified the effect of British discriminatory trade policy. India was exploited both in the area of import and export. I have to say once again, India was exploited both in the area of import and export. Large export surplus. Large export surplus as a significant feature of India's foreign trade during the colonial rule was the generation of large export surplus. Export surplus implies that countries' total export were greater than import. Once again, listen very carefully. Export surplus implies that countries' total export was greater than import. But this export surplus was disadvantageous to the country economy on the following ground. First, more export implied non-availability of several commodities in domestic market to the common consumers. It created the problem of scarcity of certain essential commodities like food grains, cloth, etc. in the country. As well as export surplus did not bring gold and silver in the country. Rather, this surplus was used to make payment for the expense of Indian office set up in Britain, expense on transport, insurance and banking services, as well as in the way as well as the war which was being fought by the Britain in not only in India but various part of the world. For that, payment was being given from the large export surplus, due to which wealth which was previously coming in India due to large export surplus started to drain out from India towards the Britain. Now let us study about the demographic profile. Demographic profile. The first official census in India was constituted in the year 1881. Census figures collected since 1881 informed that there was unevenness in Indian population growth. India was in the first stage of demographic transition till 1921. The first stage of demographic transition implied that there was high birth rate and high death rate in India before the year 1921. Since in this stage both birth rate and death rate was very high, since both birth rate and death rate were high, the rate of growth of population remained very slow. Because of very slow growth rate in population, this period was termed as a period of stagnant population. Means from this 1881 to 1921 is known as period of stagnant population. Because of very slow growth in population, this period was termed as period of stagnant population. The main reason for the slow growth of population during British rule was poverty, malnutrition, famines, epidemic, and poor health facilities. After 1921, India entered in second stage of demographic transition, and there was a consistent rise in population of the country. Thus, 1921 is regarded as year of great divine. Year of great divide. The social development of indicators were also not quite encouraging during the British rule in India. The following observation revealed that India was stagnant and backward economy. India was stagnant and backward economy. High birth rate and death rate. Both birth rate and death rate were high. Birth rate, which was nearly 48 per thousand before 1921, fell to 40 per thousand till 1921. Death rate, which was as high as 42 per thousand till 1921, declined 27 per thousand during 1941-50. The figures are still high as compared to nearly 20 per thousand and 6.4 per thousand death rate in 2016. Low literacy rate. Education was not given much attention during the British rule. Only a small fraction of people could get education. Hence, most of the population remained illiterate. The average literacy rate was less than 16%. Out of this, the female literacy rate was only 7%. High infant mortality rate. The high infant mortality rate is number of death under 1 year of age per 1000 live births during a given year. Mortality rate was very high, and particularly infant mortality rate was as high as about 2018 per thousand as compared to 37 per thousand in year 2015. The moment we are going to talk about the low life expectancy, it is the average number of years that a person may expect to live. Life expectancy was very low, 32 as compared to 70 years at present. This reflects lack of health care facilities and lack of awareness among people and carelessness of the government. The overall standard of living of common people in India was not well at that period. It was of low standard, and there was widespread poverty in the country. Thus, a result of British rule, India was transferred from vibrant economy to stagnant and backward economy. Indian economy was vibrant in 18th century only, but due to advent of the Britishers and exploitative nature of the Britishers, that vibrantness was converted into stagnant and backwardness. Stagnant and backwardness.